Hello and welcome to Policy School. My name's Alice Grundy. I'm Managing Editor at Australia Institute Press, and I'm delighted to welcome today Greg Jericho. Uh, we are both coming to you from unceded Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I would like to pay my respects to the custodians who've looked after this place for many, many millennia and continue to do so. In policy school, we've been talking about the big issues like electoral reform, the Australia-US relationship, the housing crisis, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and today we're going to be talking about tax. So we're talking about key issues, the current policy landscape, what the evidence-based research shows, barriers to reforming policy, the most persuasive arguments and key messages, and how to communicate cut-through facts and data to help you change minds. At the end of policy school, you'll be able to confidently advocate for what needs to be done, explain why it needs to be done, and how we can all work together to achieve a more equitable future. A few reminders, you can type in questions for Greg at any time using the Q&A box, and you can upvote other people's questions there too. Please keep things civil and on topic in the chat, otherwise we'll kick you out. And finally, this is a live event and it is being recorded. The video will be available afterwards on our website at australiainstitute.org.au. So in this episode, we have, as I said, Chief Economist at the Australia Institute, Greg Jericho, who's giving us 5 ideas how we can raise revenue for a fairer, safer and healthier nation. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Alice, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming along today. I know budget week can be very busy for a lot of people. It certainly is for us, but thank you all for making time to come here for this policy school, which I think is very important, especially given we're probably going to be going to an election in a couple days' time. So for those of you who attended my previous policy school on Australia as a low taxing nation, there will be some repetition here. And as our glorious executive director, Richard Dennis, always likes to say, repetition works, repetition works, repetition works. And he says it so often that we've all remembered that he likes to say that repetition works. So there will be some repetition, but also the whole basis of today's policy school is really around a paper that myself and the researchers here at the Australia Institute have been working on for the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, looking at how to raise some more revenue and what really should be on the agenda for the next parliament. Because we know whoever wins the election is going to need to raise more revenue to do all of the great services that we need to be done and to ensure that we have a really vibrant and strong economy and community. And we certainly are not just assuming that Labor are going to win or Liberal are going to win or it's going to be a minority government. We have no idea, but we know that certainly any person who is trying to advocate on behalf of a representative or is themselves wanting to be able to know what questions to ask of their representatives. Hopefully, this policy school will give you some insight on some things that we believe should be done that will make the country better, raise more revenue, and actually deliver better services. So I'm going to start by bringing in my spreadsheet, which will be, I'll come back every now and then, and hopefully it's not too dull, but there we are. Hopefully everyone can see that. Yep, raising revenue, right. All of the paper, I'm going to sort of show some tables and everything going. The paper itself goes into a fair bit of detail. It's nice and short though, about 10, 12 pages, really useful. Each of the policies that I'm talking about today, and there's 5 main ones, they're basically a 2-pager that you can basically rip out and just sort of go up to your representative and say, hey, why aren't you doing this? If you did this, you'd be able to raise this much and it would do these good things. So let's have a bit of a recap first of where we are. Remember, of course, what is the issue with the policy school? You got to highlight the issue. You got to be able to understand the facts. You got to be able to explain them, know what the information is you need to know. Then you got to explain the problem. Why does this matter? Who does it matter to? Just because there is an issue doesn't mean people are going to assume they know what the problem is. And then you got to actually provide solutions, because it's not enough just to whinge and say, oh, housing's so unaffordable, it's stuffed. and then go, and that's the end of my contribution to the debate. No one's going to care about that. Certainly, no one's going to vote for you if you're pushing that, and no representative is going to listen to you. All they're going to say is come back at you with, oh, yes, but we're doing the Housing Australia Future Fund, or we're doing whatever the policy that the Liberal parties are advocating at any given moment on a matter. And that's not what we're after. We want you to be able to provide a solution, say, this is what you should be doing. Why aren't you doing it? This will benefit these people. Why don't you want to benefit these people? Also, remember, we got to highlight this myth that Australia is a low taxing country. We are not a low taxing country. The reality is, and I've said this before many times before, we're amongst one of the lowest taxing countries in the OECD. The OECD are all the advanced economies in the world: America, Canada, those in Europe, Japan, Korea. It even goes to countries like Chile now, and so it's quite broad. But even amongst those, we are really low and well below the OECD average, well below Canada and New Zealand, who are around that average, even well below Japan, who are certainly not a communist nation, given they've pretty much always been ruled by the conservative political parties since World War II. And why this matters is that difference between the average and what we tax is around 135 to 140 billion dollars a year in extra revenue that could be used for things. And we have decided, no, we don't want to use those things. We want to be a small government country which has low tax, but also small services, small benefits, and small footprint from the government. Why that matters, though, is because we have a real lot of problems with the way in which we're providing these services. We need more government services. We need to improve our healthcare system. You see this even, in this budget. The government has made a big thing about, oh, we're trying to improve the incentives for GPs to bulk bill, rather than perhaps actually doing something about the Medicare rebate that actually will enable GPs to bulk bill. They're kind of putting incentives because they know that system is an issue. PBS as well. We know that's a big issue. The government has decided to make a priority. All of these things, Centrelink, Medicare, all these aspects that are actually important need to be funded. Yes, there are times you can sort of borrow, and certainly we're not against deficits, but in the political reality, and we've seen this week, as soon as anyone puts out a policy, the first question, the very first question is, how are you going to pay for it? And really, if you're a politician and you're trying to get that across, or if you're questioning a politician and you're saying, oh, we should spend all this money, they're going to say, well, yeah, but we can't afford it. This policy school is about saying, actually, you can afford it. You're just choosing not to do things that will enable this to happen. It's a problem because, we have, for example, in Australia, the lowest among the lowest replacement, lowest age pensions for both men and women. These two tables, it's called replacement rate. What that basically is saying, what percentage of average earnings for men and women is the age pension? For women, it's 31%. For men, it's 34%. That is well below the 61% average across all those advanced nations. It's even lower than America. And I don't know if you've watched much news coming out of America, but you don't get the sense that retirees over there are doing well. And yet we're worse than them when it comes to actually the replacement wage. This has an impact. The big impact is we have high poverty rates for people aged 51 to 65 and people aged over 65. Really high poverty rates. We're a rich nation. Why have we got, a quarter of people aged over 65 living in poverty? That's just a crime. And it's because governments have decided we can't afford to do things like actually have a decent age pension. Why? Because, we got to live within our means. We can't do these things. This is about kind of calling bullshit on that. Similarly, the unemployment assistance replacement rate. So the unemployment rate, job seeker as a percentage of the average wage, is the lowest of any advanced country. Being unemployed in Australia is worse than being unemployed anywhere in the advanced countries. You get business leaders and you get conservatives trying to say, oh, you should look at the unemployment rate in US dollars across every nation. Then Australia has got a really big level of job seeking. It's like, yeah, but I don't live in Poland if I'm unemployed in Australia. I don't live in Slovakia or in London. I'm living in Australia. So what matters is how is my income when I'm on unemployment compared to the average Australian worker? And if you do that for every country, what's unemployment like in Poland compared to the average wage of people in Poland? You find we're the worst. And what does that mean? Well, look on the right graph there. They're about 35, 36, 37, 38% below the poverty line. Well below the poverty line. Yes, the government has increased it a little bit in the past 3 years, and even after the COVID, there was a bit of a bump. But all that has done is get us back to kind of where we were in around 2006. So if you kind of thought John Howard had a good idea on how much unemployed people should get, then that's kind of where we are now. It's absolutely horrendous, much below where we were under the Hawke and Keating governments, and a hell of a lot lower than we were in the 1970s. So these things are linked. You know, if you're not going to actually provide a decent unemployment assistance, if you're not going to pay a decent age pension, you get people in poverty. So that's the problem. The solution, tax, more tax. You know, this week, oh, great, we got a tax cut. And look, great tax cut. Well, I won't say great, but it's a good tax cut because it's targeted to low income earners. It's not like the old stage threes, which were giving the biggest to people on 200 grand. The biggest is basically going to someone on 45,000. That's good. You know, that the other people who've done it most tough because of the rise in prices over the last 3 years that have mostly been on essentials. But also the people who've done it tough, people who don't have an income, who aren't paying income tax because they're on unemployment benefits. There was nothing for them. But there's often this line of, oh, we need to cut taxes because that'll help the economy. Sorry, there's no evidence that it helps the economy, and it certainly leads to more poverty. This is basically a scatter graph of countries in the OECD, those advanced countries, on how much they tax and how much poverty they got. And you can see down there in the right quadrant, that's where you want to be. You've more tax, less poverty. The only people who are doing less tax in Australia and have got less poverty are Ireland, whose tax system is kind of skewed because it's basically become a tax-free zone for companies. So it makes them look like they're doing well, but they're not. And Switzerland, also pretty good tax shelter. So you take out those two tax shelters, Australia is basically doing as bad as you could possibly do. We need to raise more tax because that helps lift people out of poverty. Okay, let's get to it now. The solution. Tax is good. We need more of it. Becomes more prosperous, less poverty. These are good things. We can deliver better services. Immediately you say that, people think, oh, great, you want to raise my income tax. No, we're not touching income tax today. This is not about income tax. The point is to improve equality, lower poverty, provide better public services, improve the environment. This is what we all want to do. Now, can the income tax cut might do some of that? You know, the income tax cut that is targeted towards people earning 45,000 less. Yeah, that's probably going to improve equality, might help a little bit with poverty. It's not going to provide better public services or improve the environment because it's actually taking money away that the government can then use to spend on vital services. So, what do we do? Well, we've got a whole range of solutions. Let's go through them. The first one, end fossil fuel subsidies. This is pretty kind of, it says what it is on the box. Australia provides, and these are the figures that were before the budget, because unfortunately I did the paper came out a couple of weeks ago, so before the budget. But we're looking at about $10.6 billion each year is being spent by the government to subsidize industries for using diesel. And notionally, it's because, oh, they're not driving on the road, so they shouldn't have to pay the fuel excise because the fuel excise is meant to pay for roads. It hasn't paid for roads for about 70 years. There's no link. All the the fuel excise just goes into the budget and it gets spent wherever it wants. There's no link at all between care of roads and the fuel excise. So subsidizing that by saying, oh, mining companies, you can get about $5 to $6 billion of that $10.5 billion. You're doing it pretty tough. Mining companies will give you that amount. Sorry, that's just madness. It's not going to actually um, deliver any public benefit. It's just giving money to companies who really don't need it. And it's actually meaning that we're encouraging fossil fuel use. Every year in the budget, when they put up these numbers, there are two things that happen. One, they revise the numbers up because they always under underestimate how much it's got to be used. And underneath, they have a line that says, because the fuel tax subsidy always keeps going up, the fuel tax credit always keeps going up. And underneath, they always say uh, the expenditure is expected to increase because there is an expectation that the use of diesel will continue to increase. And it's like, well, yeah, you're subsidizing the use of it. You're encouraging people to use diesel in this way. No wonder that they are encouraging. I won't with each post sort of a page go through the numbers and explain them all. But basically, we came up with sort of three here. One, just end it completely. That's going to deliver about 10.6 billion, or in the new revised figures, 10.8 billion, and by 28, 29, 13 and a bit billion. What we could do is just end the fuel tax credit for trucks and apply a lower rate for off-road vehicles and machinery. That'll get raised around 4.4 billion. Or we could just cap the credit. So yes, you can have the credit, but we're going to cap it, your claim at 50 million. That doesn't raise much, but it's still 1.7 billion. So these are things we can do. They stop us subsidizing fossil fuels, which are terrible for the environment. And yet the government is spending 10.8 billion now to encourage that being used. So let's end that. Next one, nice and linked to it. I'm sorry as well. Just a quick one. Are these needed for business? No, it's a minute fraction of their profits, especially mining companies. They're doing pretty well, and it is a terrible subsidy. The OECD came out and said the fuel tax credits are expensive and limit incentives to reduce fuel use. Basically, it is encouraging more fossil fuel use. That ain't good. So let's end it. Next one is really linked to it as well. Make gas companies pay. Right now, gas companies are laughing at us all, laughing because they are barely having to pay any tax. The PRT, which is this wonderful thing called the Petroleum Resources Rent Tax, is meant to be a tax that is paid when gas companies and oil companies make really good profits, really kind of super profits, which they generally do, and we tax them a bit more because they're using gas, using our resources, and once they use it, it can't be used again. So we're kind of like, you have to pay a bit for that privilege. Well, they're not paying much at all. The PRT is so convoluted, so designed with loopholes that some of the biggest LNG projects do not assume they'll ever pay it. And get this, right now, this moment, no LNG export um, project has paid 1 cent of PRT. Not one. All the PRT is still being raised from like things from the Bass Strait, which is why it was introduced, sort of stuff that is used for domestic gas. All of that gas, which we know is getting shipped off to Japan, Korea, China, nah, they're not paying any of the PRT. It's so pathetic that in the budget this year, the government has paused the indexation on beer. So they're pausing it, trying to cap how much excise is being paid on beer, and yet beer drinkers are still going to pay nearly $1 billion more a year in tax than our gas companies. So there's a couple of ways to do it. If you want more detail, read the actual report. The transfer pricing one, it's a fancy way of really sort of trying to remove loopholes. That would raise 3.2 billion extra a year. We could cap deductions because at the moment gas companies can just write off so much that it means they never pay it. That would raise about 500 million. If we cap the deductions at 60% of a company's yearly income, that would be about 1.5. At the moment, the government has capped them at 90% of um, of the income per year. They thought it was going to raise more. It hasn't. Ever since they've changed it, they keep revising down the figures. Let's actually make gas companies pay better tax. Here's another way: royalties. Here's the thing with the royalties. You know, oil, iron ore, and coal companies, they pay royalties. They dig stuff out of the ground and they have to pay for it. Gas companies, though, if they're offshore, if they're an LNG project offshore, the Northwest Shelf, the Gorgon project, all that, sorry, that's offshore. You don't need to pay royalties. You're royalty free. So you could just suck up all of that, um, all of that gas. You're sucking it up, shipping it off to Japan, paying nothing for it. Nothing. Zero. And as we pointed out, you're not even being really taxed on it because the PRT, there's so many loopholes, you're fine. So what we're basically saying is, hang on, that's not a really good state of affairs. If it's at the point where in WA, which is a huge gas producing state, more revenue in Western Australia's state budget comes from vehicle rego than it does from oil and gas royalties. Now that's just absurd. And yet that's what they're getting away with. So what we're doing is, okay, if state governments aren't going to do anything about it, the federal government should come in and let's do a Commonwealth royalty scheme. If we did that, extended it just to oil, gas extraction instead of just on land, well, then we could raise 3.6 billion a year. If we increase those royalties by 50%, because we're like, well, hang on, it's fossil fuel use. We really want to make you feel it because we actually don't want more gas being used. That would basically double it, get it up to 6.9. So that's another one we could use. Gas companies have been making money hand over fist. And yet, as I say, over the past 4 or 5 years, while gas companies have been making out due to the mother of all gas booms due to Russia invading Ukraine, they're paying less PRT, less royalties combined than, say, the drinkers of whiskey and gin. So if you're a whiskey or gin drinker, I salute you. You're doing more for the economy than a gas companies. Now, so they're two really sort of targeted at the environment aspects, but that's not all we want to care about. Let's remove the distortions in the housing market. Everyone knows the housing market is completely stuffed if you want to buy a house. I did some research recently um, where I was, in a sense, pretending, if you'd started trying to save for a deposit 10 years ago, would you have got there yet? And if you're in Sydney, guess what? You're actually further away in dollar terms from your goal than you were 10 years ago because house prices have kept going up so fast that you can never catch up. It's just a horrendous scene. And the main reason why housing prices are just going up incredibly is because of our tax system. In 1999, John Howard and Peter Costello changed the way capital gains tax were taxed. They gave them a 50% discount. Up to that point, from 1970, so just a bit before I was born, house prices and household income kind of went up at the same rate, which is how it should be. People's incomes goes up, house prices go up, but you can basically still afford it. After the capital gains tax was introduced, that combined with negative gearing turned the housing market into a casino where you could speculate on house prices going up. Then you'd be able to sell it, get a 50% discount on your income. You're laughing. And it's no shock that property prices have soared since 1999 compared to household incomes. The clearly easiest thing to do is just stop doing these bad things we're doing. So, let's look at negative gearing. We could completely remove negative gearing, probably politically tough, but we're talking $5.5 billion. If we grandfather it, and this is where we talk about difference of money, we're only down to 400 million. If we restrict negative gearing to one property, we're probably looking at 900 million. That seems pretty decent. It still allows politicians to say, oh, we still want to give mum and dad investors a chance to sort of build up some wealth, but we don't want those people with 25 homes or who are really just abusing the system. Or if we restricted negative gearing just to new properties. So, like, yep, you can have negative gearing, but it's got to be for something that's adding to the supply of housing. If you do that, really takes away most of the negative gearing, because most negative gearing is people buying a house that's already there, renting it out, waiting for the value to go up, and then they sell it and get the capital gains discount. So let's get rid of negative gearing, at least in some form. At worst, we're raising $400 million a year. Capital gains discount, though, is the big one. And it's the one people often talk about negative gearing. And, look, I think negative gearing is something that should be removed or at least grandfathered. But it's the capital gains tax discount that is the real beast. That is the real dragon that doesn't get talked about in any of the same way. Probably because what the hell does anyone understand about that? Capital gain is basically just profit. If you sell a house for, if you buy a house, sorry, for $500,000, you sell it 3 years later for 4 years later for $1 million, you've made a capital gain of 500,000. But thanks to John Howard, you don't have to pay tax on $500,000. You pay tax on 250,000. The other 250,000, that's yours tax free. And you can see how that is why it is such a great incentive for people to buy it. So we have a few policies around how we could fix that. One, just get rid of it completely, because we're talking 14.3 billion, most of which is going to the wealthiest 10%. The richest 10% get 80% of all of the capital gains discount. So we're talking, close, well over $10 billion a year. We could just remove capital gains discount on residential properties. So if you're buying shares, yep, you can get your 50% discount. But if you're buying actual property, sorry, you don't get that. That's 5.9 billion. We could do some other things with grandfathering, even if we sort of, limit it as much as we can. We're still getting 1.4 billion, taking a lot of that heat out of the housing market. Okay, very quickly, let's keep going. Superannuation concessions. These are massive. We're talking around in total about $26 billion a year. 20 billion of that is going to the richest 10%. Now, what are superannuation tax concessions? These are things designed to help you save for your retirement. And because you're putting money in super that you're not going to be able to touch for 20, 30, 40 years, depending on when you start, it's kind of right that there should be a concession to it, because you're kind of going without that money. And you want to encourage people to save for retirement, to be on super, because that means they'll be less likely to need the age pension. So you're basically doing a good thing for the government revenue base and their expenditure. You're saying, okay, I'll take a bit of an incentive to save. That means I won't be on the age pension. Really good policy sort of ideas, good public outcomes. The problem is, as I said, the real problem is that most of the benefit of the superannuation tax concessions are going to the richest 10%. Now, why that's bad is because why are we encouraging these people to save? So that they won't be eligible for the age pension. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but if you're in the richest 10%, you are never going to be on the age pension. So essentially, the government is saying, richest 10%, you need $20 billion a year to encourage you to not be on the age pension that you were never going to be on in the first place. So there's no public good. It is just giving money away to the richest 10%. What does $20 billion sound like? Well, think of it this way. If I wanted to right now just double JobSeeker, like double it, that would cost 12 billion. And if we were to do that, there would be a meltdown of massive proportions from News Corp and from all media outlets going, oh, you're giving all this money to layabouts who are doing nothing with it. You're giving them money for nothing. Well, we're giving 20 billion for nothing. There's no public good. Now, personally, we could just abolish it for the richest 10%. $20 billion could be used, and we'll find out some ways to do that. Or the government, before the budget, it seems they've dumped it, did have a policy to lower the tax concessions. So at the moment, there's basically you only pay 15% on your earnings in your super fund instead of whatever your top tax bracket is. Like if you're in the top 10%, probably 45%, you only pay 15%. The government had a policy, if you've got more than 3 million in your super. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't have 3 million in my super, should I? Well, only about 80,000 people have 3 million in their super. That's about 0.5% of everybody who has super, 0.5%. They were going to raise the tax on balances on earnings of balances over 3 million from 15% to 30%. So if you're still on a 45% marginal tax rate, you're still getting a tax break. It's just less of a tax break. They were going to do that. People went mad. Conservative papers went mad, suggesting this is going to hurt grandmas and grandpas and farmers, because there are some farmers who are quite canny and have some good accounts, and they basically put their entire farm in their super account because it means they get basically a 30% tax cut. Um, it really is a disgrace. We will keep pushing for that reform because I think it is a small 80,000 people. It's a small one, but it is vital. Raises 2.3. Finally, let's tax harmful things. End the luxury tax exemption on utes. Utes, big dumb utes, they're fossil fuel burning things. They're abused, making it seem like, oh, I'm using it for commercial reasons. And good utes now are basically family cars, and that's what they really are. And yet our tax system enables them to be, in a sense, subsidised and used. Let's look at plastic taxes. The EU has got them. This is not some weird sort of fantasy thing. This is a tax that is in place right now in the EU, pretty big economy. Let's do it here. We'd raise about 1.5 billion. Also, a thing that we found when you look at the tax system, the people who are millionaires earning over 180, 200,000 who end up paying zero tax because they get their taxable income down to below 18,000, they spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands sometimes on managing their tax affairs, paying tax accountants and tax lawyers to reduce their tax. And we basically say, hey, how about we stop that? How about we limit that? And let's say you can only claim $3,000 to manage your tax affairs. You can still try and limit how much you tax, but we'll limit it to 3,000. Most people, if they do go to a tax account, spend about $300. We're saying let's limit that at 3,000. That pretty much covers everyone except for the very smallest few. It'll raise about $1.5 billion, but also helps prevent people avoiding tax. So these are 5 sort of key things that we're doing. And I realize I've gone a little bit over time, but I want to now sort of get to the key sort of fun part of, okay, we've got all these tax concessions that we're going to get rid of, these tax breaks. We're going to make gas pay. What's all this going to raise? Well, if you did the minimum of all those things, you'd got about 11.8 billion. If you did the maximum, like, getting rid of completely the tax concessions, getting rid of capital gains tax, for example, we're talking 62.7 billion. Now, remember going back to my first sort of slide talking about how much less we raised than the average OECD, the average advanced country? That was 135, 140 billion. We're not even halfway there. It seems like, a massive amount of tax. We would still be a low tax nation with all of this. We still wouldn't be raising much. But, okay, you've got this much money. What are you going to do with it? Well, I want to give you, these aren't sort of policy prescriptions of what you should do. We're not really advising them. I think they're all good ideas. But I want to give you just some sense of how much money this really is. So let's start with 11.8 billion and talk about what we could do with it. Well, job seeker, let's raise it by $100.50 a week. Now, the reason I made that is that it put it equal with the single parenting payment, which, as you remember, that was sort of changed and people were dumped off the single parenting payment, put on job seeker. Well, let's put it back there. Let's just increase the age pension, disability support and carer payments to a nice even $550 per week. Let's increase government school expenditure by 10%. Do the same for unis. Do the same for vocational education. Do the same for public housing expenditure. And ABC and SBS, they need some help as well. Let's increase their budgets by 10%. Now, that all costs 11.8 billion. Now, if a government or political party was to go to an election promising to do that, it would be easily one of the boldest and more ambitious policy commitments really of my lifetime. It's a real sense of we are going to commit to things. We're not going to let schools just become almost the safety net, but we're going to actually help them. We're going to take advantage of the fact that Donald Trump is screwing over universities and researchers in America. We're going to increase the funding so much that we're actually going to be able to entice some of the best and brightest from America to come here and do your research here so we get the benefits, we get all the IP, and we get all the productivity gains. Same with housing. Let's do these things. Let's increase VOC expenditure so we can actually get some help with the skills crisis. So, that's pretty cool. Now let's talk about what if we had $62 billion to spend. You're suddenly increasing JobSeeker by $211 a week. Age pension, DSP, carer payments, parenting payments single by $110.50. You're doubling public school expenditure, doubling university expenditure, doubling vocational edge expenditure, doubling housing expenditure, doubling ABC and SBS, doubling aged care quality because, we've had some royal commissions that show that aged care providers are screwing us over. Let's double the expenditure on that. Let's double the expenditure on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And let's increase by 500% the amount the government spends on public dental services. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing just how much you can do with money that isn't even making Australia like Scandinavia. We're not even getting up to the amount of tax if we did those massive things. We're not even getting to what New Zealand or Canada tax, let alone UK, let alone France, let alone Denmark, Sweden, Norway. We would still be a low taxing nation, but just think of the doubling of all of that. And of course, we wouldn't double. We could do so much more over so many more areas. Why aren't we doing it? Because the government at the moment is saying, oh no, we can't afford it. Well, you can afford it if you choose to actually address some of these problems. Address the fact that you're giving 20 billion a year to the richest 10% for no good reason. That you're deciding that gas companies, please keep laughing at us. We really like being the butt of your jokes in your executive boardrooms. Please do that. It's because of a choice. Now, of course, going around just saying we're going to raise tax is going to be a hard sell. But if you're also able to say, we're going to be able to raise the age pension, we're going to be able to raise spending on schools, on, dental services, we're going to be able to raise, health expenditure, all of these things, you start and are being able to paint a picture of an Australia that seems like a good one to be living in. And you really got that positive message with a vibe. And when people say, oh, yeah, but you're going to raise my tax, it's like, are you a gas company? Are you in the richest 10%? Probably not, because 90% of you aren't. And also, here's the other kicker. Most people in the 10% understand that the system has kind of been so rigged in their favor that it means that their kids can't afford a house. That means that basically everyone is saying, oh, we won't send our kids to public schools like a lot of them would have when they were growing up. All of these things really come across that we can actually sell tax rises as a good optimistic policy. And hopefully this quick chat of 45 minutes has helped you give some tools. I'm now happy to take your questions. I think Alice has probably got a few that can fire at me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you got something from it. And remember, the paper, Raising Revenue Right, is on our website. It's got all those tables, it's got a few graphs, and it's got each of them in a couple, 2 pages that you can basically rip out and go, oh, here's the thing on superannuation, rip out, here's the thing on gas. It's really designed to try and be right, nice and easy and helpful for everyone. Thank you very much.
And just a reminder, we put all of the PowerPoints from policy schools on the Australia Institute website as well. So if you'd like to see those graphs and the charts that Greg has had today. So we've had a very animated chat and we have lots of questions. Let's start with this one from Dave Rowe, who says the RBA model has as one of its economic models a desired unemployment percentage. Can you explain how this works in light of the government obsession with low job seeker payments levels?
Yeah, it's a policy of cruelty, of absolute cruelty. The Reserve Bank believes to keep inflation low, so that'll be good for everybody. We need to have, they think, 4.5% of people try who are in the labour force should be without a job. That's what they believe. So, in a sense, their tactic when they raise interest rates is to hopefully not so much lower inflation, but to raise unemployment because they're hoping people have to pay more for their mortgage, so they'll spend less in the shops. So, business owners will go, gee, it's a bit quiet here. I'll cut back on the shifts, or I won't hire any more people, or worst comes worst, actually, I'm going to have to lay you off. That means unemployment rises. That means there's less money because people aren't getting good pay rises, fewer people working, so there's less money being spent. So shop owners aren't thinking, gee, they're all lining up to buy my products. Everyone is really flush with cash. I better keep my prices down. Really, what it's about is just raising unemployment. And look, I think it's a terrible policy, and I think their belief that 4.5% is total crock, given it's been around 4% for over 2 years and inflation has actually been coming down, so it's completely wrong. But if you are going to adhere to that kind of view, what you're also saying is not only do we need people to be unemployed so that the rest of us can have stable inflation, we need unemployed people living in poverty. And that's a pretty disgusting place to be. And until we have either political party suggesting that needs to change or that this, 4.5 or 4.25% rate is what we need to have, also having job seeker massively in poverty is just a policy of cruelty.
Right. We have a question from Jeff Wilson who asks, is the Garno Sims CSL a good solution? Would returning revenue to households in periodic dividends be a politically palatable solution in a cost of living election?
Oh, look, yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to how you want to do it. And to be honest, I think it's either that or do a tax cut. It really kind of delivers the same thing. We're kind of more about going, okay, we've had a pretty good run of tax cuts of late. The stage three and I'm going to pat ourselves on the back that we helped destroy the old stage three and get a better one through. And even these new tax cuts, they're pretty massive and they've been pretty costly. When the stage three came in, that was about $20 billion a year. These new ones, we're talking an extra five, six, $7 billion a year. It's more about, okay, what about the government services? Let's, instead of returning sort of revenue that was raised in the form of either an income tax or, as you say, a dividend, let's return it in the form of better services, helping out those on really low incomes and ensuring that people can actually go see a GP, people can and get bulk billed, those type of things. We think are the greater priority than just ensuring everyone gets a bit more money.
Mm. So the focus of this presentation, as you said at the beginning, is not about income tax. But since we're in question time, we have a question from Paul Loring who says in the 60s, the top rate was 90%. The USA was the last to lower it. Companies just don't pay execs pay rises when 90% goes into tax. It puts a ceiling on salaries. What do you think about having a ceiling on, of having a tax rate of something like 90% for the top rate?
Oh, look, I probably wouldn't go that high. I said, look, I very strongly believe we don't need to lower it from 45%. I don't think there's any evidence that we have a brain drain of talented, high income individuals. In fact, when you look at the actual level of tax that you pay on your wage here in Australia compared to most OECD nations, we're actually lower. We're a low taxing nation because we tax income low. And even in America, you got to start earning around 150, 160,000 before you're uh going to get a tax break if you go over to America. And yeah, you're going over to America, but you don't have our Medicare over there. You don't have, our infrastructure and our quality of life. So, yeah, if you're caring about high income, you know, great, but I don't think they're the type of people we need to try and encourage to stay. I wouldn't raise it so much because you do get to a point where it becomes uh, a bit like I think I'm safe in saying we're kind of seeing a bit with cigarette excise where it becomes almost socially acceptable to avoid paying it by getting it on the black market. It's the same with the high income tax. You kind of need to keep it within shouting distance of the company tax rate. Um, and so I wouldn't uh, do that so much. And again, it's not so much about raising income taxes because that's almost political death, although the opposition is going to go to an election with the policy to raise income taxes because they're not going to agree to the government's changes that just went through Parliament. But I think that's a harder ask. And I think actually it's not so much the high individuals, their tax rate they're paying that is the problem. It is all those concessions on superannuation and capital gains tax that massively go to the richest that not only help them lower their tax, but also helps them build up their wealth in a way that makes the wealth inequality massive and has a massive impact on other Australians because you can't afford to buy a home. So that's where we think the priority is rather than that high income tax rate.
Mm. We have a question here from Hunter Waskew. I'm sorry for my pronunciation of your surname. Uh, will voting independents and Greens change things, or is it just a factor that all parties are less likely to support change?
Oh, look, and we certainly here at the Australian Institute don't advocate or don't, we never recommend voting one way or the other. We certainly, if I can put it in a nice way, one of the lines that we have is that there's no such thing as a safe seat. And regardless of where you are, there is no reason that you should be taken for granted by whoever. And don't think that, oh, I live in a safe seat, so there's not much point. You know, there are a lot of all the seats won by the Tills essentially were safe seats. I mean, they Josh Frydenberg he thought he had a seat for life, and then he didn't. And now the Till representatives are a fairly broad range, and some of the things that they agree with us on tax, some of the things they don't. They have some different views, but one of the good things about independence is it does bring in a different voice. You're not just getting two voices, you are getting a multitude. We think that's a good thing. We think more voices is better for democracy. Hopefully it leads to better outcomes. Whether it will or not, that's not really for us to say. We certainly don't think anyone should be scared of a minority parliament. It's not going to be a big shock. Governments have to negotiate in the Senate, or they can combine like they did a couple of night or last night to kill the Morgian skate when Labor and Liberal voted together. And if we have a minority government, hopefully we wouldn't get too much of that happening, and hopefully we'd get whoever is the part and the major party having to listen to the voices of independents and actually have to think a bit broader than what do I have to do just to defeat Labor or Liberal, but also what are some good policies that I'm getting pushed to do by others. So again, we don't advocate for any politician or political party. We just point out no such thing as a safe seat. There's nothing scary about a minority parliament. Minority parliaments actually work better because it forces the government of the day to start negotiating even before they bring legislation to the House. At the moment, they pass legislation, then think, oh God, now we've got to negotiate with the crossbench in the Senate. Well, the only difference is you have to negotiate with the crossbench in the lower house, and that can make for a very good government, but it doesn't guarantee it. Hopefully, if it does happen, it does end up with one. But either way, we'll be pushing for these changes, whoever is in power after the election.
Mm. And as we've covered in previous policy schools, when there was a Gillard minority government, it was pretty much a record breaker for the amount of legislation that was passed. So far from being chaos, it was pretty well organised. We have a question from Lachlan Edwards who says 20% of Australian taxpayers own an investment property. How can a party win an election on an anti-negative gearing platform when so much of the population wants to keep it?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really tough thing. And that's probably why, certainly on that aspect, we're probably going to be having to lean towards more the grandfathering aspect of it. We certainly, however, know that there's often been a bit of a myth about the unpopularity of all these things. Bill Shorten did take policies to limit or to reduce the capital gains discount to the 2019 election, and also things on negative gearing. And everyone's like, oh, that killed him. And it's like, no, not really, because he took it to the 2016 election. Actually, he picked up votes there. And also, what happened in the 2019 election is Labor picked up votes in seats that are now the teal seats, that are the seats that actually do have a lot of investment property owners who knew it was going to hurt them, but they also know that kind of it's too good to be true. It is not something that is really in anyone's interest, because even th those people, even people who own investment properties, are looking at their kids and going, far out. The only way they're going to own a property is probably if I buy it for them and negative gear them for a while, and then work out a way to transfer ownership. And everyone kind of knows it's not good. So yeah, 20% own them, but 80% don't. And we're starting to get to the point where, people in their 30s, a majority of people in their 30s, for the first time, certainly since World War II, and probably before then as well, a majority of Australians in their 30s do not own their own home, or, have a mortgage. That's extraordinary. And that's only going to keep rising. And it's going to get to the point where we're going to have to stop thinking like it's 2001 and John Howard's view of the world is politically savvy, because it's going to get to the point where there's going to be a majority of people who don't own a home, don't own investment property, and don't think they're ever going to be able to own a home. And also, we're starting to get a critical mass of people getting close to retirement age who don't have a home and are starting to think, I'm screwed, because our retirement system is completely based around the belief that you will own your own home by the time you retire. And so as a result, you don't really need much money. You're fine. You've got a good asset. You can sell that. You can live up. You're not paying, ongoing rent or anything. You're all good. And when we start getting to the point where a real critical mass, perhaps a plurality of voters, are I'm retiring and I'm renting, and oh, I'm looking at the age pension and it's the worst in the OECD, and I'm going to be one of the 25% and growing people who are retired and living in poverty. That's when we're going to start seeing one political party, I think, get some really good first mover advantage of being the one that listens to them. It's tough. None of these are easy sells, but when you actually are kind of explaining the problem, explaining the solution, and then explaining what can be done that makes things better, then at least you start getting a bit of an argument that people are going to be able to listen to, rather than, oh, we can't do anything about negative gearing because it's politically bad, or News Corp will hate us. It's like, well, News Corp hated Dan Andrews for the entirety of his time as a premier, and he kept getting re-elected. We don't have to be limited by what News Corp decide we should care about.
Mm. All right, I'm hoping I can squeeze in two last questions. The first one is from Jennifer Manson, and she asks, what about a universal basic income?
Yeah, look, I think, I'm not against it. There's a lot of people who think, that's too bolshy. I don't think really have any great issues with it. I think politically it's tougher than just raising the age pension, raising job seeker. I think if we were able to first raise job seeker and the age pension to levels where they're not living in poverty, and it becomes almost accepted that actually you shouldn't be living in poverty, then that I think helps us get to that next step of improving, of perhaps going to a universal basic income. Problem is, at the moment, if we're kind of looking at that, are we just going to have a really shitty universal basic income, which actually has people living in poverty? And it's like, have we improved anything there? So I kind of think let's improve the things that we know need to be improved, and then perhaps that helps us go to a universal basic income later.
Mm. And last one is from Claire Bettington, and she asks, aren't all RBA staff neoliberal economists? The outdated thinking in general, but alive and well in the RBA. Do the recent RBA reforms help to try and change their attitudes?
They help to try and change. I'm not sure they're going to change too much, especially looking at the board appointments. Not a lot there. An interesting thing, though, is in the budget papers. The budget basically predicted unemployment for the next 4 years, basically going to be 4.25%. And that was kind of the Treasury and the government pushing back on the RBA, saying it's 4.5%. Basically saying, actually, we can aim a bit lower and the economy won't go mad. And there's a real push from the government, certainly on the back of their employment white paper back in 2023, to kind of ditch the RBA's view on what full unemployment is and actually aim for something better. It's hard to shift the RBA. It has a lot of people who've worked in the RBA their entire working life, and there is a fair bit of groupthink there. But I think at least there has been some small measures to at least try and, at least from Jim Chalmers and the Treasury, to say, you guys aren't the arbiter of how many people should be unemployed. We can aim better than what you're going for.
Mm. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. On that note, we'll tie up Policy School for the day. Thank you all for coming along and for your engagement and questions. We hope to see you at our next webinar tomorrow, which is with Jeffrey Robertson for Australia's Biggest Book Club. Don't forget to subscribe to the Australia Institute on YouTube. You can catch all of our previous webinars. And I hope you've been listening to our wonderful podcasts. We've got Follow the Money, Dollars and Cents, and After America. If you have any questions, you can email us, mail@australiainstitute.org.au, and please put Policy School in the subject line. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.
There, guys. Thanks.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.